Hey everybody, welcome back to Part-Time Tabletopper. My name is Adam and I have a very cool tutorial for you guys today. So in my current D&D campaign, I reached a section of my world where my players were going through desert towns and desert scenery. And I thought for the battles there, it would be very cool if I had some modular desert terrain to have like a desert city, essentially. And so what I have done is gone ahead and made a set of buildings that look like this. So in this tutorial today, I am going to show you how I made all of those buildings, starting with my easier ones that were kind of like my rough draft, and then the more complicated ones that are like this. Finally, for all of that, I also made a desert terrain board that I just made super quickly with some leftover XPS foam and materials I had. So I'll show you how I did that as well, and we'll build this village together. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's start with our material list. First, we're going to need some dollar store foam board and also some chipboard, which I just cut off from a cereal box. We're going to need various things to cut with, like an alpha blade and a hobby knife. We're going to need straight edges and rulers of varying sizes, texturing tools like that wire brush and a crumpled up foil ball, some barbecue skewers, a hot glue gun, and finally a half dome made out of styrofoam here that I picked up from the crafting store, which is going to go into the more complex houses. So first I'm going to build these smaller, simpler homes. I've gone ahead on a different piece of paper and written down exactly how many walls of each size I am going to need for each floor plan. You see here that I've used a ruler and a straight edge to trace all of those out, and now I'm about to draw in some doors and windows using these stencils, but you are absolutely more than welcome to freehand it. Once I have all of that down, I'm going to cut these out and I'm going to start gluing them together based on the designs that I pre-measured. Using that hot glue gun, I'm going to start gluing these walls together. You can see I've cut out the windows, and on one of the builds there, I did cut out the door and realized after the fact it makes way more sense for me to just pull the paper off of that foam board, and then I can draw the door in and just have it a fixed piece of the wall. Grab those barbecue skewers and use the pointy end to poke holes around the entire building along the roof line, and then cut it down and hot glue the pieces of wood in so it looks like the support beams are sticking out of the walls. It'll look just like this, and it's going to match that classic like Adobe desert kind of home. Now, because we're doing a mud brick home and I want some of those bricks to be exposed like this is an older building, I'm taking pieces of this foam board and just ripping the paper off, and what I'll end up doing here is drawing in a brick pattern on the foam and then using the paper as a guide for where I'm going to put my mud texture later. You see I'm just freehanding this pattern in and making sure that I'm doing an offset staggered pattern for the stones and the bricks. I'm using a hobby knife to go ahead and trace it in at first, and then afterward I'm going to use a pen to deepen those recesses, and finally I'm going to use a foil ball to texture the stone pattern in. And here is how it looks when it's done. Using my smaller straight edge, I'm going to trace in wood beams and make this a wooden door. After I trace those beams in using the same techniques I used for the stone, I'm going to also use a wire brush to create a wood texture effect. Here's where the chipboard comes into play. I'm just cutting out a small little rectangle here that I freehanded, and I am going to glue that onto the door here as a support beam. Here's the material list we need to do the painting and the texturing on these homes. First, you'll see that I have paintbrushes of varying sizes, including a dry brush. I have sand, I have Mod Podge, though you could use regular PVA if you want. I have some cool bits of fabric that I'm going to use to make awnings. I just picked these up on Amazon. You have dowels, or you could use the barbecue skewers. I have a homemade black wash, honey brown acrylic, burnt umber, camel, and like a very, very light beige. It's time to make that mud texture that's going around this mud brick adobe home. I'm using Mod Podge because I like the waterproofing effect that it has, but you could use normal PVA glue. I'm going to mix that up with my honey brown as well as some sand until I get a material that's really, I don't want it to be too chunky necessarily, but I also don't want it to be too runny. I just kind of eyeballed it, just something that's easy enough to spread over the paper portions of this build, which you see me starting to do, but something that's not so runny it's going to fall off or so thick that it's hard to spread. Now, a common sense thing that I did not catch here, but I did later when I made the bigger houses, was that I absolutely should have painted the brick and the doors and the wood things before I put this material down, but I'm going to make it work for these first ones. Again, this was just a rough draft. Speaking of painting, here I am painting the wood bits as well as the stone. I'm going to use that burnt umber as a base coat for the doors, and then the honey brown as a dry brush over the top of it. And then I'm going to go over to those stones and use that camel color or the khaki for the base of the brick. And then I'm going to do a light dry brushing with that very, very light tan. Here's what that base coat looks like when everything is dry. Here I am dry brushing on the honey brown to the wood pieces like I mentioned earlier, and then you'll see me dry brush the stone with that lighter beige as well. Now, I was a little bit sloppy when I put that mud material on, so here I am after the fact going through and doing some correction spots just to make sure that everything looks flawless. Now, I realize I didn't put this in my supply list, but an optional thing you can do is use some Agrax Earthshade to act as a wood stain and weather up all of the wood. Using those barbecue skewers or some wooden dowels, as well as some hot glue, and then those bits of fabric with the really cool patterns that I said I picked up on Amazon, I'm going to build some awnings for all of these buildings. While I didn't record myself building the awnings, it's pretty straightforward as far as the structure and then just cutting and gluing everything together. In fact, you can actually see on this one I'm going to have to re-glue that, but that's what they look like when they're all done. Now, just for myself, I like the way this looks. I'm going to take a little bit of black wash, and over the bits of foam that I've made look like wood, I'm going to darken all of that up. After making those smaller homes, I felt confident enough to try some more complex builds. One of them is going to be a 2-story one with a playable interior, and the other one's going to be an L shape. Here are all of the walls and the tracings that I did, just like with the first home. I also decided, I have these little 3D printed doors and windows that I made. I figured I'd want to switch it up a little bit and maybe see how those look in this build. Using the same building techniques we did on the smaller homes, and then including those domes as well as the 3D printed doors and windows, this is how the buildings turn out so far. I was also smart this time and painted everything before I put the mud on. Finally, after following all of the same painting steps that I used for the smaller homes, here is how everything turned out. I have to say, I do really like the look of the windows and doors here, so if you have access to a 3D printer, I do recommend going this route. Then again, there's nothing wrong with crafting them. Also with those domes, I did airbrush the gold paint on, but if you don't have access to that, it's perfectly fine to hand paint it as well. One additional thing I did here too is I did a little bit of a yellow dry brush on top of the honey brown just to highlight some different areas of the wood floor. A completely optional step that you can do is create a desert board to put all of this on. Now, I'm using XPS foam, but you can use whatever you'd like as your base. I'm going to use sand, some very light grout, and some fine ballast as my sand mixture. I'm going to use brown paint and black paint, which isn't pictured here. And then I recommend using scenic cement, but if you don't have access to that, using a spray PVA adhesive works well too. So if you've been following my channel, you know that like a year or two ago, I built this massive battle arena. As you can see, that involved a lot of circular cutting, which meant that I have a ton of these left over. They've just been collecting dust, and I have been trying to decide what I'm going to use all of these circle pieces for, and that was my big motivation for creating this desert board. I said, hey, if they're already in my storage space, let's turn them into something. So I'm going to go ahead and use a black acrylic paint just as a dark base coat underneath all of this, including the edges, because I'm a huge fan of my battle terrain boards having a black edge. And then after that, I'm going to put on some brown paint. So I'm not concerned about having an even coat because we're going to cover most of this up with our ground texture. I'm going to water down some Mod Podge. You can use PVA glue if you want, but again, Mod Podge is waterproof, which is why I like it. And I'm just going to paint that over this entire thing so that I can start putting on my ground texture. First, I'm just going to use some actual real sand as my base coat. To create a bit of variation, I'm going to use this Woodland Scenics Fine Ballast, just because it's a different size and a slightly different color. I am a big fan of variety. Since most of that Mod Podge has been covered up now, I'm going to go in here with this spray adhesive and just put it over everything to help lock in what's already there and also create an adhesive for this grout that I'm about to sprinkle on. Now make sure you wear a mask when you use this stuff and be very sparse with how you sprinkle it around, but you see that it's starting to create some varying textures and colors, which I think just looks a little bit cooler than having pure sand. Finally, just do 1 or 2 more coats of that spray adhesive to really make sure everything gets locked down. And here's the finished product. And that's it. Following those simple steps, you too can build some cool desert houses in desert terrain so that you have epic desert city battles. I personally love this set, and I'm happy that I've had a couple sessions where I've gotten to use it. I hope I get to use it again in the future. And more than anything, I hope that you get some use from this tutorial so that you can do the same thing. So, of course, if you like this video, please like it so that other people can find it and they can do the tutorial here along with us. And if you want to see more tutorials like this in the future, please subscribe. And if you want to see what else I've done, go check out my channel. I've got a handful of other unique tutorials there as well. So in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, guys. I appreciate you. Happy crafting, happy gaming, and I will see you soon. Bye.